Hello and welcome to Lessons Learned from the AI Trenches. Today's webinar is sponsored by Taos and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to a resource page for getting started with Taos. You can also find a link to the Actual Tech Media Guerrilla Guide Book Club, as well as a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Visa gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. And to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Visa gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic conversation that we hope you'll all join in on later on in the Q&A portion. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our four presenters today. Starting us off will be Addison Snell, who's CEO of Intersect 360 Research. He's joined by Suresh Ganesan, partner in the AI and analytics practice at IBM, John Evans, a fellow and DevOps engineer at Taos, and Chris Huntley, an associate partner for solutions at Taos. And now I'm going to turn it over to Addison for a brief round robin of introductions and to kick off our discussion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Addison Snell with Intersect 360 Research. We are analysts who cover high-performance data center markets, which through most of our 15-year history has been focused on what you could refer to as high-performance computing, but certainly has evolved to include a lot of trends throughout the scalable enterprise, such as cloud and big data and hyperscale. And of course, one of the most recent trends that's really revolutionizing both traditional high-performance computing and the modern enterprise is artificial intelligence, or more specifically, machine learning. And that's been a major part of our research in recent years. Suresh?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are joining us today. My name is Suresh Ganesan, and I am an executive partner with IBM and a practitioner in the AI and the analytics space. Nice to meet you all. John?
Hey, everybody, I'm John Evans. I am with Taos. I've been with Taos for about 7 years, and I basically eat, sleep, and breathe all things data, DevOps, and cloud. Nice to meet y'all. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Huntley. I'm an associate partner for solutions here at Taos with a specialization in cloud, data, and organizational transformation. So Addison, why don't you get us started with some industry insights and take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it because this is such an important topic that we've been monitoring in our surveys and our market sizing right now. I mentioned the fact that machine learning or artificial intelligence have really been transforming the enterprise right now. And what we found in our research is if we look at traditional high performance computing users, people have been doing scientific computing or high-end analytics and doing parallel computing. Obviously, there's been a move toward machine learning there, and 2/3, 67% of experienced high performance computing organizations have started to implement have already implemented machine learning as part of their overall workflows. And that often comes with various types of expansions in budgets or expanding their configurations, modifying their configurations to accommodate machine learning, and the necessary skill sets that go with that in terms of data science can be a big change for an organization. But beyond that, it's not just traditional high performance computing organizations that are doing machine learning right now. Beyond the high performance computing market, we're now monitoring an additional $5.4 billion of spending in 2021 that are beyond, in no way associated with that high performance computing market. These are enterprises that aren't doing high performance computing, that are now doing AI initiatives in no way. So this isn't like a supercomputer that also does AI. This is someone with no high performance computing now saying, all right, I need to either on-prem or usually in the cloud start doing a machine learning kind of adoption to get value out of data. And what we find is, of that $5.4 billion, it's highly oriented to cloud. 75% of that spending is now public cloud versus on-prem. And that's just because cloud does a good job of absorbing the need for new capabilities that you don't currently have on-prem. Now, it goes beyond cloud, though. There's a lot of skills and expertise that has to become part of that conversation, but still, cloud is a primary driver of that new AI spending, certainly when it's net new. And even among the established HPC users, we see a big growth in cloud to take on those new kinds of configurations, buffers and spending. Cloud does really well with uncertainty. So cloud is growing among both of those pockets there, but it's 75% of the pure AI spending. But then, not everything is all sunshine and roses all the time. We find that 18% of people we survey cite moderate or major performance issues. And among those who do, the most common, 51%, are saying data movement is a big part, contributing factor. Because when you're doing these hybrid workloads, or even just traditional storage, moving the data and keeping these processing elements fed is a major challenge of scalable computing. And cloud can exacerbate that challenge. So data operations becomes a major challenge for scalable computing across the enterprise. So those are just a few of the data points out of our research. Suresh, how does that jive with what you see in the market?
Thanks, Edison, for nicely teeing that up, right? Being a practitioner, I just wanted to share some of the real world examples of, right? And obviously what you see in this charts are real, right? That's what we see in the field, right? Let me rewind a little bit, right? And Addison talked about the cloud is a big driver behind, right? In fact, the entire enterprises across the industry sector, when the digital transformation started 4 or 5 years back, right? The first step was towards adopting cloud, right? Moving data to the cloud, bringing data to the cloud, and to a great extent applications, right? But that is not just lift and shift, right? Companies then started realizing, hey, if it is just a simple lift and shift, I am not necessarily taking advantage of the things available to me on the cloud, right? After all, some enterprises are born native on the cloud, and majority of them are not necessarily, right? So the first step became, bringing this data and the applications onto the cloud, right? Given that we are going to be talking about the AI and ML, which kind of the second leg, right, which is the major trend now. At the end of the day, all these need to pretty much show up in terms of business value, in terms of enhanced customer experience, dollar saving, profits for the enterprise, so on and so forth, right? So the second leg of the transformation is what this AI stuff, right? AI requires, and machine learning requires a lot of data, right? And a lot of computation. More data, the ability for machine learning, right? AI models to predict accurately increases. Of course, it all depends on the type of algorithms and the models that, the enterprises arrive at. That's going to contribute as well, right? So some of the use cases, if you look at, right? banking and financial and insurance space, for example, right? How this is really used, right? And then we will come to handling the data aspect of it, right? The users really don't care whether you use AI or ML, but how the value surfaces, right? One of our banking and financial customers, right? When a credit card is swiped, right? Whether it is truly a fraudulent transaction or actual transaction, how is that determined real time, right? If you think about it, right? I sit in Dallas, Texas, and a transaction shows up somewhere in Connecticut that needs to be kind of detected, right? That's an anomaly. AI is heavily used there, right? I make a call. I have a problem with my insurance, and it ends up going to an agent servicing this call. So at that point of time, if that agent bringing all information about me, why probably Suresh is calling, that if that agent is able to greet me and get to that point quickly, that translates into an experience, right? It is not just a stickiness, it is delivering value, right? The agent is able to do their job efficiently. They are equipped with intelligence is surfaced, right? And we do this even in supply chain, right? Retailers as well as even restaurant business. Beef is cut in, with the suppliers, and they ship that. And by the time it has to show up at the restaurant's back door, right? A lot of things need to happen, right? Things need to be maintained at proper temperature, right? There are RFID sensors. That data is coming real time, right? Patterns are observed where these deviations happen. Parties are alerted. Supply route is optimized. Seasonality factors, right? Demand goes up at some place. So I have to dynamically route. Line of business managers know what exactly is happening. A hurricane is hitting, right? What is the impact of that hurricane to the business, the properties that I manage, rather than waiting for somebody to pull up that data, right? And then produce a report. Ability, if an ability is given to me, wherein I can go and naturally query, right? I look at a map and then say, this is the hurricane. What is the impact of this business, impact of this hurricane to my business? If I am able to query naturally, right? These are all the places where AI, right? Our customers are using it. This is not a science fiction any longer, right? But to do all this requires a solid data foundation, right? Ability to serve this data, whether structured, unstructured, real-time, near real-time, accurate data, trustworthiness of the data is critical for whether I'm creating a dashboard or using it to create AML models to detect all these things and surface that intelligence is very critical, right? So the lot of things happen under the covers, and that requires a solid data foundation, and hence the data ops. And that's what John and Chris are going to take us through. What is really informed?
Yeah, I completely agree. And you did a great job outlining the problem. First of all, in terms of how complex it can be, in terms of all the different interplay, the data points that affect a total solution. And then secondly, how specific it is to one particular organization. Now, the good news is that that's exactly the sort of thing machine learning does really well, is look at an individualized problem and learn a solution. The bad news is that it's hard to get just one cookie cutter solution that works there. I can't just go out and buy a jar of AI and rub it evenly over all of my data, right? Get a solution. Hey, I've got a lot of data. Better get 2 jars of AI. So we really make sure that we have enough. And Suresh, at the beginning of your response, you communicated that it's more complicated than just lift and shift to the cloud, and how important the skill set is. I like to think of it as, if you could give me a professional kitchen and all the freshest ingredients, and it doesn't mean automatically I'm going to make you a 5-star meal. Absolutely. In fact, you'd probably do better having a professional chef come into my kitchen with whatever I have on hand, and you'll get a better meal than what I would do with all the same resources. The skills wind up being a really important part of the conversation. And that's how it is with understanding data science, data operations as we move to AI. John, what do you think?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges here really is as you're moving all of this data is keeping the infrastructure up and running that is moving and transforming the data and getting the data so that's fit for use, right? And so it turns out that if you don't have that appropriate care and feeding, things start to break down. And when they break down in the data world, it starts costing the organization, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And once that bubbles up to the executive leadership, they have to make a call as, is this initiative actually showing enough value to the business to be able to continue? And if the answer is no, a lot of these initiatives fail and they get shut down. And so out of that necessity, something that has kind of been born is this concept of data ops. And that's what we're going to talk to today. So you may be asking the question, what is data ops? And I'll be here to tell you that nobody seems to be able to agree on a concrete definition. You go to Gartner, you're going to get one definition. You go to Wikipedia, you're going to get a completely different definition. If you go to like a different business leader or thought leader, they're going to come up with something completely different as well. But concretely, what we're going to talk about today is the data ops is really a collaboration framework that allows us to improve communication, integration, and automation of data as it flows from the producer all the way to the consumer. And while it's true, it borrows some concepts like CI/CD from DevOps, and Chris is going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment. The lines of demarcation start to emerge pretty quickly between DevOps and data ops. And so what we're going to really see is that like where DevOps is mainly focused on the infrastructure and the automation away of that aspect of it, data ops is going to touch every aspect of the data lifecycle. And so you can hit the next slide. And so data ops is really broken down into these 7 pillars, and these pillars kind of help to forge a mature data ops practice. And the first of these is that we kind of get rid of ETL in place of ELT, and that's going to be shocking for a lot of organizations that rely heavily on ETL because ETL is their workhorse. But ELT is it's able to do things a lot faster, and we aren't filtering any of the data early on, so we don't lose any data context as we move data through the chain. And then from there, we need to start building out repeatability, and Chris can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, John. So repeatability, as you said, falls into the DevOps kind of platform where we start to merge. The issue with data ops is it's closer to the edge. A lot of people think of DevOps as an IT problem or something kind of behind the scenes. Data ops comes right up to the business, and it's used constantly in a strategy. So we talk about reliability through CI/CD. That really starts in the planning phase with well-architected framework. And is it secure? The number one thing. Is everything secure? If it's not secure, we don't even start there. Is it operationally excellent? Is it reliable? Does it have performance efficiency? And is it cost optimized? And really the 6th pillar is sustainable. But as we go through the architecture of that, that's where your CI/CD starts. So we're getting everything to a state that is repeatable, consistent, constant, because every part of the process is proving something towards the final product. I say process ends in product. If your process is secure, repeatable, constant, and you're confident, then your product will have all of those consistencies built into it. And you'll be able to say, absolutely, We're sure our data is good because we're sure our process is good. We know how we ingested it. We know what we did with it. We know how each part of it did it. And then it's that constant reliability. It's no snowflakes. It's everything is exactly as we thought it would be every single time. And the more we can rely on that, the more we can make business decisions and critical movements through our data. So it's really about that reliability. So thanks, John. You can get back.
Yeah, no problem, Chris. And you highlighted a really interesting point there about snowflakes. When we do ETL, we are effectively creating a snowflake each time that is designed to onboard a specific set of data, a specific way for a specific use case. The problem with that is that when the maintainers decide to up and leave because they get a better offer at another company, now you're left with a pipeline that nobody really understands how it works, and it will break down. Whereas with when we embrace data ops, we're really looking at generalized pipelines patterns that are actually maintainable, where the individual pieces of the pipeline are themselves atomic units that we can bolt together to create other pipelines. So we're not reinventing the wheel each and every time for each and every use case. And then from there, we're also doing things like creating repeatable environments that we can spin up and tear down whenever we want. That's a concept that we see a lot in DevOps that we kind of borrow into data ops. We're bringing a big concept that I often see with clients that are just starting out that kind of struggle with this. We're bringing data governance to the forefront and to the center of their business strategy. A lot of younger clients, you'll find, actually just kind of try to bolt on data governance as an afterthought. But I'm here to tell you that's how you end up in the news for all the wrong reasons. You leave a bucket unsecure. You leave a database facing, into the world where everybody can see it, and now all that information winds up on the dark web. And so then, in addition to that, we have this concept of automated testing and monitoring that's going to go a lot deeper and a lot broader when we're dealing with data, because data is so fluid. And Chris, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the data, is fluid and it requires constant updates. So it's not really one of those things it's fire and forget. We don't just put it in place, close the door, and hope it works out for the long term. It's going to need some care and feeding and constant evaluations, because it's not only the data that's coming in, it's when we apply the AI and ML, it tells us things. We start to uncover truths, and then we start to look through the data and figure out what other truths are there, like what other threads can we pull, and how do we find the gems that are in there? We're mining for those diamonds. And I think that all comes out of the process, but by building in these things from the start, as we talked about CI/CD, it's infrastructure as code. It's a lot of things that are just very repeatable to take something that's fluid and give it consistent points, which we flow through. So rather than having it run in both directions infinitely, it runs from single point forward. We get consistency, reined into the product. And I think that still come back to product, comes from process. And this is another piece of that process that we look at and we say, yes, I'm confident. And as you talked about bolt-ons, same situation. If we're very confident in how we got the ELT, bolting that to the next set gives us just one leg up. Instead of recreating the wheel, it's one more secure point of confidence in a fairly fluid process that gets right up to the edge of the business. And I think that that's kind of the whole, holistic picture keeps coming back. Like, none of this is bolt-on. This is all designed, thought through, developed, and created in a very thoughtful manner, rather than ad hoc and kind of working through things as it was in the past. Now we have a lot better box that we've started to build and to put things in. And I think that gives us a different perspective.
Yeah, totally. And if we've done everything right, then we can actually realize the seventh pillar, which is that collaboration and self-service that we always like to talk about, but is always really hard to achieve. Where we don't have a data ops team. Remember, teams are specialized groups of people, which means we're effectively just creating another silo in our organization. Instead, data ops winds up being embraced through the entirety of all teams. And they work together to realize the organization's vision. And then that, of course, helps to reduce things like heroism and focuses team efforts on the sustainability of processes and self-service consumption, interoperability, data enablement, data democratization, all those big buzzword concepts that you hear in the marketplace today.
If I could just interject here, I think it really aligns with a lot of what we see in an industry perspective. I'm a professional analyst, right? And I'm here to tell you that a bad analyst can do a lot of bad analysis with good data. And that is exactly where we see a lot of AI and machine learning going, right? If you just implement it without a lot of thought behind the quality of the data and what you're going to learn, first of all, you put a lot of effort into learning things that are obvious, right? Like the consumer behavior of carrying an umbrella is strongly correlated with the environmental that it's raining outside, right? And like, okay, well, maybe I would have known that without doing an expensive AI project. Or you start getting false causalities, like people carrying umbrellas causes baseball games to get canceled, right? And those are classic examples of you're kind of getting the graph wrong a little bit by not doing your analysis properly. And that's before you get to complicated things like statistical biases and what are you really trying to do here? So if you're going to do an AI is way easier to do if you don't care if it adds any value, if you don't care if it's right, if you just want to do it and have it do something. So the question is, on top of these 7 pillars, if I do it right, where does it add value to the project, right? And maybe I'll go back to Chris on that. How does this add value to the customer?
I think it adds a lot of value in many different ways. So, thanks, Sheldon, for your input to kind of get us this direction. I think that collaboration and self-service starts to spread the data through the organization. It becomes de-siloed. It becomes, as John said, democratization of data. Like I love that term, but it's giving value to people in the organization that previously might not have been able to do things. You have an analyst with a great idea, but didn't have access to the data sets. They weren't secured, they're tokenized. We didn't have a way to control that, but that's data governance. So by, working backwards, we're going to democratize this and we're going to have automated testing to be sure it's consistent so the analyst gets it. And the data governance is sure that they get what they're supposed to get, only what they're supposed to get. And we can confirm that. We've got, CCPA and GDPR compliance built into the product. That's not an afterthought. That's not a compliance issue. That's how we do business. And that comes from all the others, environment, maintainability, CI/CD, and all the way back to the ELT. As data people, we hoard things. Like I never want to delete things. I want to keep everything. Like give me everything and I'll work it out at some point in time. And that's what we're doing with that. And, by doing that and following through these 7 pillars, we're able to get really great results very far down the chain to people who have brilliant ideas that before might have been overlooked or might not have been able to prove their concept. It would go to the data scientist or to the BI professionals, or it would stay in the data tier. Now it can go all the way to the business analyst who's thinking about a particular problem that they saw, and that can bubble up the food chain and be revolutionary. And I think that that's really where we get a lot of things. The more we spread it, the more value we get.
Chris, one more actually, right? I just want to give a real world, right? This is something that I see in the field often, and I'm sure you will have a very good point of view on this, right? Many conversations with my customers when we say, hey, it is very important to put this data foundation, right? And to your point, a product requires the process, right? And they think, yeah, I got a solid DevOps. How difficult this could be, right? but classic DevOps, which is software, right, kind of static versus dealing with data, which is fluid, the point that you touched on. Do you care to comment, about that?
Yeah, I think that's where we get into the issue, like, Addison had pointed out first. 51% of people struggle with stuff. These are not amateurs. These are pros coming at it in the environment, and it's still a struggle. If it was easy, everyone would do it. We have pretty deep penetration in AI and ML right now, as you can see, like in that first slide that we initially talked about, but it's not perfect. And at some point it becomes art, strictly data framework or just technology.
It's totally an art form, right? Yeah, okay, we can automate to reduce some of our toil and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, there's no prescription here. I cannot give you an end-to-end framework and say, if you follow these things step by step, you will have data ops in your organization. You're going to have to overcome things like, your data scientists, they don't really care about the infrastructure or how much the infrastructure is costing. They care about their experiments, and they are more than happy to spin up a great big cluster to run an experiment. And if it means that they get their results back sooner so that they can write their paper. Oh, and by the way, they have another experiment that they're going to run in an hour. So they're just going to keep that cluster up and running so they don't have to spin it up again. In the meantime, you're going to see that big old cluster on your bill at the end of the month, and you're going to have a little bit of a heart attack. So, being able to uncover those things it turns out, is actually really, really challenging. And in fact, when I go out on engagement and I sit down with clients, one of the first things that I do is I get everybody into the room so that they're talking to each other. You would be amazed how many teams just that should be working together just flat out don't talk to each other. And then you get them into the same room and get them asking questions, and then pretty soon they're like, oh, you own that? I thought this other team owned that. Wait, you think I own that? No, I don't own that at all. And it creates this great synergy because they start to realize the real vision of the business instead of the vision of their individual teams, and work together, and everything kind of goes into this flow state, working towards a common goal. I think that's a really, really powerful, really powerful benefit of data ops, but really, really challenging to achieve.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say data drives business, right? That is the core of how this all works. Everything in the end is driven through data. And then it's the process of, is the data good? Is the analysis good? Is the product good? Because that's product too. Data is a product of the pipeline, but the analysis is a product of that pipeline. The reporting, other things, business direction, forecasting, still another product, as it goes. So I think that all of those play a significant role, and that's still about collaboration and self-service. Like you said, they'll spin something up that's really expensive. Well, we build stuff into the self-service that helps with that. We help them choose the right tool for the job at the right time and make it very convenient. All of those things play a role to getting this to the state you want, but it's evolutionary. You just can't, if you could buy it, throw it in a box and just deliver it like every time, absolutely, everyone would. That would be the holy grail solution. So we do it, but you have to meet the organization where they are on the path. And that's really critical to your data success.
Yeah, and I will say, quite frankly, that Taos is really good at this, and Chris can tell you all about like how Taos has helped our clients to realize these challenges. Because like I said, adopting data ops it's not an overnight endeavor. There is a lot of breaking down of silos. There's a lot of building out operational maturity so that you can realize that all important operational excellence in your organization. And it's just, it's something that I find that our clients really, really struggle with when they try to go it alone.
So, we talked about like, what can Taos do for you? I think that's kind of the biggest thing now. We talked about what it is. We talked about how it's done. Now we talk about how we apply our process to this. So Taos with IBM, we look at everything in here as raising the value for the customer, because that's the end goal. If we raise value, we raise revenue, we raise performance, we raise profit, we can increase efficiency, we get new business, because the more, again, every time we do something, it just needs to provide value for the customer. That's the bullseye in the process. Operational agility still needs to point back that way. When we kind of go through all of these things, and these are the pillars on which we build the process, but it's really critical to raise value with everything you do. And even data governance is in there. Like I said earlier, compliance with CCPA and GDPR isn't just regulatory overhead. It has a point to it. It has value to it. It gives people its democratization the other direction, coming back inside from when it was going always outbound. And I think that, when we look at it, Taos comes in, we're trying to raise value, right? That is the number one goal of any operation that we do. We're trying to figure out, how do we make this process worth more than it costs every single time, in a repeatable way that you can have confidence in and you can use to run your business. No confidence, you're not going to make those decisions. It lowers value. Confidence, process to product gets you everything you're looking for. And how do we do it? So if we flip to the next slide, this is kind of how Taos has approached it. So we take your data as it is and we meet you on your journey. So unstructured, semi-structured, structured, all fine. And then we figured out, okay, what does it take to be successful? How many chefs in the kitchen do we think make up a pretty good team to produce this? Like, what is the process and who has to be involved to get that? And we looked at it and we said, okay, data architect, yeah, that's going to give us that really confident leadership, very senior personnel that can help make those decisions, that help you decide, how are we going to handle this? When we're merging unstructured with structured, how do we get those sources where they're consistent, we have confidence, and the process goes? How are we doing the ELT? How's the T working? And a lot of it's done there in the architecture, and it's constantly changing. Somebody changes a feed, new data comes in, we got to handle it somehow. And we have to make sure that it merges with the old data, because you don't want to get a change and have your pipeline change, and all of a sudden last year's reports have nothing to do with this year's reports. Now, how do you run your business off that? How do you do historical data? It's really about coming to a holistic solution that makes that work. We have senior data ops engineers, and that's really about making sure the pipelines work. The pipelines are built, each process works, each tool in the chain or link in the chain is relevant and it produces value. And so we put our most senior people on. Then we also have data ops engineers, keeping the lights on. The worst thing you can have with data is when these pipelines go down, your feeds are off and things are delayed. A lot of people who have done data for a long time know what it's like to come in at 7 a.m. and realize things didn't run overnight, or things are behind, or you're missing something. Like, how do you catch that up so your reports are consistent when they're delivered? And that's a lot about just the constant ops. But we get there through our DevOps engineers. That's the last chef in the kitchen. They're out there, mixing all of the bottom level ingredients that we add into the recipe. And it takes a steady hand. You can have, you can put me in the best kitchen in the world. I'm not probably going to produce Michelin quality food. Almost assuredly not. But if you take a Michelin quality chef, drop them in my kitchen, I'm going to be pretty happy with whatever gets produced, I bet, because it has a lot to do with experience and art. It's not just a recipe book. We both would follow the same recipe book and have vastly different outcomes. And that's really what the process is. And as I said, we meet you on your journey, whether it's, Neptune, RDS, Cassandra, Spark, any of these tools. we're agnostic to the clouds. We work in all of the hyperscalers. So we work with the Azures, the Amazons, the Googles, the IBM cloud, Oracle cloud, all of the above, because we're really about providing value. And value doesn't mean necessarily destroying everything, recreating the wheel, and then doing it the way we want. It's taking where you are, because businesses make decisions, and every decision you've ever made was for a reason. We might not know it, and that's a lot of what consulting is, digging into, like, how did we get here? How did the business make these decisions? Why did we make these decisions? Every product on this slide has a purpose, right? It's a tool in the toolbox. And we have to figure out how it's being used, why the decisions were made, and how do we integrate that in? And that's what our teams do. We've really based it into the pod model, because some of the other things we talked about in previous webcasts, the Great Resignation. It's sometimes hard to find people. So as you're building things through, you have something consistent. You want a consistent base of people that are running this, and many organizations know, like, that rock star status, that person leaves, we have a serious problem because we lose our data hero. Now what? This is really reducing that to a controllable situation. So we don't have those data heroes. We don't have that rock star at risk, that bus factor. We're increasing the bus factor far above 1 to make sure the process is very consistent. And when we meet you on your journey, we carry that through. So we don't just come, deliver, stop, and then, everything works well. We know it's evolutionary. We know that product, will always come from process. And that's really the biggest part of what we're trying to do, is work with our clients to deliver the best possible value in the best possible way with the least disruption to business that we can have very high confidence in. We want that p-value in our process as high as possible. Just like the data scientists are looking for that, that correlation, that proof. That's what we're trying to get to with our data processes. And each part of that 7 pillars, 5 pillars, they're all there for a reason. And, we think we provide a pretty, robust solution where we can help. And that's sort of, what we're here for. We're here to help deliver value in a repeatable way that we have confidence in. All right, so that concludes the process, and which I've talked about here for data. I'm going to hand it back over to Scott for some Q&A, so we can get deep into the questions that you have. You've heard from us, now we want to hear from you.
All right, great. Thanks, Chris. Really great conversation there. Appreciate all the insights from everybody. Let's get into some of these audience questions. We have quite a few, including Venkat liked the analogy about having the 5-star kitchen versus having a 5-star chef in a lesser kitchen. The first question here we can get to is from Paul, who's asking, what are a few future business use cases for AI that are in concept or development applications right now? And let me throw that to Suresh first, if you don't mind.
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Scott?
I can hear you.
Okay. Fantastic. Just wanted to make sure microphone is not doubly muted. That's a great question, Paul, right? The way I would answer, right, it obviously depends on the industry, and the use cases vary across the spectrum, right? But if there is one thing which is common across multiple industry sectors, it is the customer experience part, whether that customer happens to be their end customer or enterprise customer, right? An employee within the enterprise, right? So that is, you guys all might have heard about this concept called a digital twin, right? A digital twin is nothing but, it's representing a persona, right? This is powered by AI, takes advantage of computer vision, right? And understand what the user does by studying the facial expressions, gestures, listening to what they ask, and then kind of respond appropriately, right? So it is not just template-driven questions with slot filling. So you can really have a two-way dialogue, continuous dialogue, right? Not ask a question, get an answer, and then you ask a subsequent question. Ability to connect back. It is as if you are having a conversation with a real human being, not a chatbot type, right? And that's digital twin. This is really right happening, right? So you will start seeing this happening in the consumer sector, retail, right? And even telecommunications, customer support, healthcare, all these areas, right? And this is a emerging space, and that's an use case which is common for multiple industries.
Okay, super. Yeah. Thank you, Suresh. Addison, did you want to add anything to that about what you're seeing as far as, future business use cases for AI that are in concept or development right now?
I did. Thank you. And I liked how Suresh started that answer with regard to digital twins because as it happens, I'm actually attending the International Supercomputing Conference in Hamburg, Germany this week. And the opening keynote was on, guess what, digital twins. So it's not just the traditional scientific notions, scientific computing notions of supercomputing that we talk about at a conference like this. AI and machine learning is really revolutionizing approaches in a lot of different ways. And we look at, included in that, how does machine learning interact with traditional scientific computing, where we see it certainly in pre and post processing ways, where the machine learning can be used for data reduction on a problem before you do computation, or for things like image analysis of anything from a seismic image of where you're going to drill for oil, or helping a doctor read an MRI or some other sort of scan. AI is good for that in terms of post-process as well. I think what's really exciting is what areas are true net new lines of business, and we see those popping up in different ways, in everything from natural language processing and digital assistance to autonomous driving. Anything that a person can learn how to do, in theory, a computer can be trained in a similar way. Although I just like to emphasize, when we talk about AI, I think people tend to focus on the I part, the intelligence, and you have to remember the A part, which is artificial. It's still a computer program that will do what you train it to do, and you have to train it well in order for it to be valuable. And I appreciated the talk from Taos on how to make sure that your AI project is truly valuable, not just what's a new line of business that we can have, but does it add value to the organization?
Okay, great. This next question, I think I want to direct to John Evans, and it's, how much overlap is there between AI ops and data ops, and how important is it to have staffing or procedures for both?
This is a great question, and this goes back to like one of the fundamentals of data ops is that it winds up touching every aspect of the data lifecycle, right? That data lifecycle is absolutely going to include, any of your AOps processes and patterns and procedures. So the way that data ops ultimately fits in is that data ops helps to enable your AI ops, and then to that end, you still have the appropriate staffing that is, like your subject matter experts in AI ops, but they're working with your data ops practitioners to kind of to enable that all those pillars that we talked about, right? To ultimately make sure that our AOps is achieving that operational excellence, that the governance is right, that there's repeatability, strong repeatability, very strong repeatability, because of how much AOps winds up touching, and things of that nature. Chris, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think that you've really kind of covered it with that. I don't want to muddy the water too much. I think, yeah, that's exactly the case. It's right about in that sweet spot where everything has to balance. I don't know that there's another alternative that we would want to approach that way. I think that's kind of where I'd put it in the middle.
Yeah. So, Chris, let me probably add one more color slightly, right? I think probably whomsoever asked this question also wanted to see the kind of overlap, and I think John, you kind of nicely covered. But I want the audience to understand when they use the terminology, people use AI ops and the ML ops interchangeably. Okay. So if by AI ops they meant the machine learning ops, then the ML ops and data ops are really complementary. They are like a hand and glove, right? The data ops cover the sort of super umbrella, right? And the data coming out of those pipelines in the ML ops, it will directly feed into the ML ops pipeline, right? With minimal processing necessary for feature engineering. Because at the end of the day, ML ops deals with all these feature engineering, right? So for that, the data has to come from. Where does that come from? That comes from the data ops and the pipelines associated with that. So that's why it's very complementary. But the data ops is the overall sort of umbrella.
Okay, super. And just for everybody in the audience, Suresh had typed out some responses to two of the questions that we just addressed, and I think that I just made those public in the list here, so you can find some more detail there as well. This next question comes from Dan. How would this work if we're using Azure pipelines with Synapse Analytics? And John, any thoughts on that one?
Absolutely, yeah. So, okay, so we're Azure pipelines and Synapse Analytics, right? Here we're talking about tools. And I think that one thing that practitioners will often get mixed up is that tools don't motivate process. Process motivates tools. We see this in DevOps a lot too. It's like somebody when I talk to a client about their CI/CD and they'll show me their Jenkins. I'm like, okay, that's great, but really I want to know what your CI/CD process is. What is the maturity around it? What does the approval process look like? The quality gates, the repeatability, all those things is really what I care about. It's great that you've selected a tool, but how are you using that tool? So to this end, Azure pipelines, that's where you're going to build up the patterns for your CI/CD and repeatability, right? And then you're going to, in terms of loading the data, if you're doing it from a data ops perspective, you are going to think in terms of that extract, load, and transform perspective. So maybe instead of using like an ETL tool, maybe you're using like just you're copying to like a blob storage, and then from there you're using an ADF or something similar to load the data into Synapse. So less about the tools and more about the process and the patterns that you're going to incorporate into those tools, if that makes sense.
Okay, great. This next question comes from Warren, who's asking, how is AI affecting data governance? And Warren adds the context, lots of potential issues with privacy intrusion. Addison, you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's an excellent question. I think data governance or data sovereignty are possibly one of the most important topics in IT for this decade. And AI does add to that significantly in terms of how do you steward your data, including past data, present data, and having it future proofed. How do you handle data privacy, data security issues, and across multiple geographies? So how does it have an effect? Oh yeah, absolutely. What's the effect? It makes it way more complicated. There are absolutely lots of potentials with privacy intrusion. And in particular, when you look at how much of AI is done in the cloud, because now you've got a cloud vendor who's in the loop also. If you're talking about hacking into a cloud, well, that's in a way more difficult than hacking into an individual enterprise, but then there's also a lot more at stake. I don't have a big solution to offer here, other than I would say that if data is central to your business and the stewardship of that data, then having somebody who's got a long-term data sovereignty strategy in place, I think, is critical to the organization.
Okay, super.
I would add one more thing, right, Scott, here to
Yeah,
Addison's
go ahead.
point. I think Addison addressed it beautifully, right, from the governance, privacy aspect, all those. After all that, when AI starts working, right, how do you trust that you are doing it responsibly, right? Yeah, the data is governed, the correct data is provided, all that. But when you act on and come up with recommendations, how do you ensure that it is not biased? The responsibility, the responsible part of that also equally kind of, a place. I am accepting, say, for example, in the insurance, I am rejecting, right? AA is rejecting the insurance claim. On what basis, right? Was there a bias involved? How am I making sure that is an area very, very important as well?
I'll put in one more word on that since it came around, is there's different ways of looking at the value of data, and one of them is when enterprises look at data retirement. When we think of data from an AI or scientific computing or analytics perspective, it's from the standpoint of how valuable the data is, and it leads us to say, well, I'm not going to get rid of any of that data. It might be valuable, if not now, then in the future. But there's another perspective where many enterprises are looking for what data can they get rid of and when. I'm legally required to keep certain data for a certain period of time. After that, I would like to get rid of it because it's not only not valuable, it potentially becomes a liability because data can be subpoenaed if I have it. If I have it, it can be evidentiary. If I've gotten rid of it legally, then it's not evidentiary anymore. And there are certainly areas where people want to understand. Part of data governance is appropriate data retirement. Where is the data valuable and where is it a liability? And that's looking at that honestly is part of the overall data governance strategy.
I agree with you there, Addison. Like to add on to that, one of the things that I work with clients on is building up a proper data lifecycle that includes data archiving, data destruction, right? And it's always a funny conversation because a lot of clients are more the data owners themselves than the the consumers or the producer side, but the people, the actual stewards are like they never have actually thought about a world where they're saying, okay, this data isn't being used anymore. We need to keep it around for compliance. Okay, now it's outside of the compliance window. Let's get rid of it. They don't think like that, and getting them to think like that and getting them to achieve those aha moments is truly remarkable because then they start realizing, going back to the value of a project. the more opportunities you have to optimize and reduce cost, the better you ensure the longevity of that project. And part of that is like, how well do you construct your data lifecycle?
Okay, great discussion on that question. Um, got one here for Christopher. Marcus is wondering, are most customers bought into the fact that data is the driver for the business? You know, is there ever any resistance from the business to that approach?
Yeah, this is a great question from the business perspective. And in a lot of businesses, it's not the driver. There's instinct, intuition, other processes that drive it. And it takes a while to get to the confidence level to make data the driver. Once you have confidence in the process that delivers the product, then it becomes easier for people to start buying in. And they'll buy in silos and then sort of flowing down the pipeline, then up the pipeline. It tends to get bought in somewhere near the middle often. They find the most use for it and they have the most understanding of the confidence in it. And we can start showing why this makes sense. So I think that there's a lot of resistance. Almost all businesses have resistance at first because they want the confidence. They need to be sure if they're using it as a driver, it is better than their intuition or better than the current processes, or there is value, right? If there's enough value in it, then it gets used. If we can't prove it, we can't show the value, we don't build that confidence through the process, through documentation of how it works, through being able to answer the questions when people ask them, from your analyst to your most senior executive. You know, when they ask a question, can you answer it in a way that they understand it and it doesn't generate more concern or less value? So I think as long as we're showing the process and providing transparency into how it works, where it comes from, how we hold it, how we're sure of the confidence, how we know it's going to hold up over time, how we know we're not just adding bias or making spurious correlations, how all of those things build in helps everyone really buy in. And I think we're at that point where it's kind of, you know, becoming much more of a driver than it was in, say, even 5 years ago.
Fully agree with that, Chris. And like the thing that I would add here is that it's it's just like any other change, right? Humans are vehemently and adamantly adverse to change, which means that your challenges for adoption come from, you know, people, process, technology. We always say that like adopting a new thing always comes down to people, process, and technology. In DevOps, we look at the DevOps maturity model and building up confidence in our processes and in our patterns to say, you know, yes, we can take the human element away and we can automate this and it will run reliably and as expected. It's the exact same thing in data ops, only now we have like umpteen other variables to make repeatable because, again, data is fluid.
Yeah, and I would add just one other small thing. Go ahead, Suresh.
Sorry. No. What I wanted to say, right, to John's earlier point, right, while data is fluid, you know, the business teams getting their confidence, right, it takes some time. And one of the key areas that they always care about is while the process, as long as it addresses, right, simultaneously protecting the data while democratizing its use, right? Businesses care a lot. If you are able to truly democratize the use of that data, then you bring the power and the businesses love that, you know.
And, you know, not to be contrarian, but the only word I would object to in the question is the premise that it has to be the driver for the business. Data is the driver for the business. It can be a driver for the business. It reminds me of earlier in my career, I'm a marketing guy, and it was in vogue to say about any organization, well, we have to become marketing driven. We have to be a marketing driven organization. And I think that's black and white thinking, that if we were in an engineering driven organization, and I think that can be okay. But just because you're in an engineering or innovation driven organization doesn't mean that that's equal to, and we should suck at marketing. Right? You can have data be a driver for the business without being that being the only driver for the business. You can have all of your traditional drivers of your business as well, but also be good at learning from what data you have.
And putting a pin in it, just putting a nice bow on that. Great point, Addison. When we're talking about, data ops, DevOps, at the end of the day, these are business processes. And like any process, it is a driver of the business, but it is not the driver. All the processes have to work together for the organization to be successful and to grow. And what that means for your specific organization is not going to mean the same thing for one of your competitors, for example, or even like a partner organization. You're going to have different viewpoints. You're going to have a different way that you measure utility within your organization, and therefore it's going to look different for you. The journey is going to look different for you.
Okay, well, I hate to jump in and do this, but I think we're going to have to leave it there. This has been such a great discussion. But, Christopher Huntley, if somebody wants to get started with Taos or find out more, what do you recommend?
Well, certainly you can follow up with myself or John, or really any of the other Taos contacts. When you're registered, we have your information. So as you follow up, we're going to certainly follow up with you in both directions. Make sure if you had questions, there were a few here that didn't get answered, and we'd love to answer them for you. And if you had any other direction or areas or thoughts, we'd love to hear them. So we're definitely going to reach out for everyone who attended this, but you can reach out to us. Like I said, myself, John, always available, and we would love to answer your questions.
All right, super. Well, thank you. Thanks, Christopher, John, Suresh, and Addison for putting together just a really informative presentation, for all these insights in the Q&A. We really, really appreciate your time today. And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Visa gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that gift card today is Tracy Vins from Wisconsin. So congratulations to Tracy. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Taos for making this event possible. And thanks, as always, for attending and for all of your great questions that helped drive this discussion today. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.